In the workbook is a list of 5 basic 3D terms. Make sure you review those so that you understand them when you hear me use them. And the first thing we're going to do is alter the scene of this 3D layer. So in the 3D panel, let's click on the word scene so we can change some options for the scene itself. Again, make sure you have the Move tool in the toolbox because only the Move tool can edit 3D objects. And to see the ground plane, let's go up to the View menu, Show 3D Ground Plane. In the Control panel up here at the top, we have 5 options for controlling a 3D scene. The first one orbits the camera, then we can roll the camera, pan the camera, slide it, or zoom in. Using the Orbit 3D camera mode, drag until the ground plane matches the plane of that desktop image. So I'm going to click, hold, and start dragging. The grain that's on this desktop image comes in quite handy. And we're going to rotate that down until it looks as if these letters 3D are sitting on this desktop versus just floating above it. Once you have set your ground plane, I find it visually gets in my way a lot, so I'm going to turn it back off. So I'm going to go back to that View menu, go down to Show, and turn off the 3D ground plane. Next thing we're going to do is adjust the light source. In the 3D panel, let's click on the infinite light. And I want you to think of infinite light as the sun and the type of shadows that it can cast. So here I now have an icon here right on the canvas, and I can roll that around to adjust that infinite light source. So I want it to make the shadow cast off to the left. In the 3D panel, now let's click back on the environment and see what options we have for that. In the Properties panel, it now displays the options that can be adjusted for the environment, which includes shadows and reflections. To decrease the opacity of the resulting shadow, we can change its shadow opacity. So I'm going to drop it from 60% down to about 45%. If you wanted a reflection, by the way, it's off because the opacity is 0. So if I made that opacity anything but 0, notice I could create a reflection. Kind of doesn't make sense for a wood surface, but it would if this was metal or glass. But we're going to keep that opacity at 0. All right, let's go ahead and save your document. And now let's alter the 3D object itself. So in that 3D panel, I have to first click on what I want to change, which is the object itself. And in the Properties panel, this is where the extrusion depth is. So if I didn't want to have that big of an extrusion, which I don't, I'm going to decrease that size. So make it so that you can see through the D. Now when you have the 3D object itself selected, you get this little widget in the middle, okay? And it's called the XYZ widget because it gives you access to all the planes that control a 3D object. This widget is to assist in scaling, rotating, and moving the object along each axis. There are little symbols here, and each one does a different function. The very tip would move it along whichever axis you are dragging. The next one would rotate it around whichever axis you are dragging. If you don't like what you get, you undo. And sometimes that widget will disappear. So I have to go back to something else, and when I click back on, the widget reappears. The farmost symbol here would scale it along that axis. So I could stretch it, compress it, whatever I needed to do. Again, I'm going to undo, get back to the widget. The small cube shape that you see in the middle, that would scale it in all directions. So you can make it bigger or smaller. Notice the shadow is updating. Now if you move the object up along the y-axis, well, that now makes it appear as if it's floating above the scene. So if you ever do that and realize, nope, I need it right back down to that ground plane, instead of trying to drag it back, you can simply go to the 3D menu and tell it to move the object back to the ground plane. And it's going to snap it back into position.